everyone. The time is 10 o'clock, but it's great to see you, and I hope you're here with an expectation in your heart for something special to happen. I hope that's the case. Is that the case? No.
Do you know, it is such a joy to be with you. Again, you can imagine in my job, I travel all over the country speaking, and you can imagine sometimes, not often, but sometimes I drive home and it's not been a great Sunday. But I remember coming so vividly to Dorset last summer and driving home back up the motorway with such a full heart of joy, having spent the time in beautiful Dorset with you lovely people. So it was an absolute no-brainer when Adrian invited me to be part of this weekend to come and join you again. So thank you so much for having me. So wonderful to see your faces again. I thought before we dive into the theme for this weekend, whether I might introduce myself just a little bit further. And so I've got a few pictures to help us. So I am a son. This is my mum. I am a brother. This is my sister. She's called Debbie. She's a primary school teacher from Birmingham and speaks very slowly. You know how primary school teachers are like, they say, hello, how are you? You know, she even speaks to me as her brother like that. And then on the right is my brother Steve. He is Steve Knox. I'm Phil Knox. My wife is Danny Knox. My brother is married to the girl with the best name in the world. Her name is Nick Knox. How absolutely brilliant is that? I preached at their wedding. It was the easiest opening gag I've ever had. Beautiful. So that's my brother and sister. I'm a speaker. My job is, I feel God's called me to be an evangelist. I became a Christian when I was 6 years old. All I've ever wanted to do is tell people about Jesus. And so I try to do that by speaking. I'm an author, as has been pointed out. More on the books later. I'm a friend. This is my best mate, Ads. We're going to be talking about friends at some point this weekend. I'm a James Bond wannabe. I'm a runner. I've decided over the years I can either eat less or run more, and I've decided running more is the solution to my life. I'm a water skier, and so here are, believe it or not, here are kind of, 7 of us up behind the boat. I'm the guy in the green shorts on the kind of second in from the left. I'm a husband. This is my wife, Danny. She's got a boy's name, but she's definitely a girl. And we are together at Phil and Danny Knox. I'm a dad. These are my 2 boys, Caleb. On the right, his love language is football. And Joss in the middle, who's a little bit older now, his love language is fighting. He's at that unfortunate height now where he's kind of like up to about my groin and loves a headbutt, so it's bad news at this time in life. But before any of that, before I'm a dad, before I'm a husband, before I'm a James Bond wannabe, before I'm a son, before I'm a brother, before I'm any of those things, the most important thing about me is that I'm a Christian and I follow Jesus. And when we think about our identity, as we may do a couple of times this weekend, at the core of who I am and what you need to know most about me is I love Jesus with all I am. And my deepest desire for us this weekend is that we leave at the end of it loving Jesus a little bit more. I'm a Christian. And the theme for this weekend is journey. And when we think about the Christian life, I found journey as a really helpful metaphor for us. And I don't know about you, but I love journeys. As you can imagine, with my job, I spend a lot of time on journeys. But one of the things for us as my wife and I is we've appreciated over the years many journeys. One of the joys of getting to know Aaron, as I've been saying, is we often go to France. We're there in a few weeks, May half term. Spring harvest holidays. If you talk to Aaron, you'll get a £50 discount, and he'll get a £50 discount if you've never been before. So please do that. We are not on commission, but it helps. So we often, but one of the things we do is my wife and I, we love the long journey on the other side of the channel because those journeys are so important, aren't they, for relationship? Journeys are brilliant for relationship. I've also been on some kind of, that metaphorical journeys, let's say. One of my claims to fame is that I once broke a world record for the world's longest 5-a-side football match. I worked for Youth for Christ at the time, and we decided to raise some money once, and we worked out that the world record for the world's longest 5-a-side football match was 43 hours. So we decided to break that and play football for 48 hours. My knees have never been the same since. And even worse, I was on the losing team. Can you imagine playing football for 48 hours and losing? Not only that, we lost by 300 goals. I'm emotionally scarred by that journey. But also another kind of actual journey we did to raise money for Youth for Christ. I once cycled from Land's End to John O'Groats. That was before the football. I'm not sure I could have done it after the football. But journey's a really useful metaphor for us in the Christian life in loads of ways. And when the Bible talks about what it's like to be a Christian and the journey we go on, first of all, we're called. There's a moment where God calls us. Then we have a decision moment. All of us have decision moments to make. The most important decision any of us can ever make is to choose to follow Jesus or not. And journeys are full of decisions. Fortunately, this morning I had a sat-nav to tell me where to come. But we have decision moments all the way through our journey of life. Then the Bible refers to, once we've made the decision, after our conversion, there's a process called sanctification. Sanctification is the process of being made holy, being made new. All of us are on that journey. The thing about sanctification, when the New Testament talks about it, is that it talks about it in all three tenses. Because of what Jesus has done on the cross, we have been made holy. Because of our journey, we are being made holy. And one day we will reach our destination when we will be made holy. But this process of sanctification, which is a very Christian word, you don't often hear that in adverts, do you? But this word of sanctification, it's a journey. We are not the finished article. But within that, the next stage of the journey is just perseverance. We have to keep going. And finally, there is glorification. One day we will reach our destination. It's a really helpful image, is journey for the Christian life. And the Bible's full of journeys. From kind of Genesis to Revelation, there's so many journeys. We see the journey of Abraham, who leaves his homelands to start a new nation, the people of Israel. We then have the Israelites' journey, the beginning of Exodus. We see the Israelites leave Egypt and make a journey to the Promised Land. There's then the journey to and from exile, when as the people of Israel go on their journey of messing it up and then being made holy and then messing it up again, eventually they get taken over and they get carted off to Babylon and Assyria and have to journey back, and that's what the stories of Nehemiah and Ezra are about. The Old Testament's full of journey. Then we come to the New Testament. We see Jesus constantly on the move. A lot of the time we read stories of Jesus, he's on the move, he's on a journey. I think that's partly because he was so good at relationship. He loved walking with people, getting to know people on the journey. And then, of course, you get to the book of Acts. And as the Apostle Paul is planting churches all over South Europe and the Middle East, he's often on a journey. You get those maps, don't you, at the back of your Bible, which is Paul's missionary journeys. The Bible's beautifully full of journey. And the thing with journey is it's both a challenge to us and a comfort. It's a challenge because you can't stay still as a Christian. You have to keep moving. So don't ever get to a point where you think you've got it sorted. That's what my hope, wherever we are, whether we are the holiest person in the whole of Dorset this morning, there is still more. There's still steps to be taken forward. But it's also a comfort. Because we can take comfort in the fact, even if we're really perfectionist, that there's always more to come. There's always progress to be made. We're good, aren't we, as Christians, at beating ourselves up about not quite being there yet. But journey helps us understand there's always more to come. So this weekend, will you come on this journey with me? Will you come on this journey with me? So what we're going to be doing is, over the course, you've got your programs, you'll have seen what we're going to be doing through this weekend. And the first thing we're going to be doing is asking the question, where are we? As I got in the car this morning at a very early hour, even for me, I'm a morning person. Don't know about anybody else. Any morning people in the house? Fantastic. Love a morning. I got in the car this morning. My sat-nav needed to kind of pinpoint my location before it could decide how to get to the beautiful village of Sherborne. And to get anywhere, you need to work out where you are before you go there. And my first encouragement to us when we think about our location is that it is your direction, not your location, that determines your destiny. It is your direction, not your location, that determines your destiny. And as we explore that this morning, my prayer is that we may all know, or at least turn our direction towards Jesus this morning. I've been prayed for beautifully. I don't think I've ever had quite so many people pray for me. I'm coming here again. It's beautiful. But I would love us all to pray that the Spirit of God might speak to us this morning. So would you join me in just opening your heart this morning? And in your own heart, just saying to God, Father, would you please speak to me this morning? Father, would you please speak to me this morning? In Jesus' name. Amen. So, the story that I'm going to explore as we think about kind of where we are is just about my favourite short story in the whole Bible. And it's in Luke 15, and it's a story of two journeys. And it's a story that probably all of us are familiar with if we've been following Jesus for any amount of time. And it's the beautiful story of the father who had two sons. And we're going to skim over a few details. The point of this is it's not evangelistic talk this morning. Although I hope when we talk about kind of this idea of coming home, we remember the journey that we've been on. But actually helps us kind of locate ourselves in the story. Jesus told stories very deliberately so that we, as followers of him, might find ourselves in the story. So I wonder where you find yourself in this story this morning. Luke 15, from verse 11, Jesus continued, there was a man who had two sons. I resonate with that. I'm a man who has two sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. Now this, as soon as Jesus says this, the crowd would have been shocked to the core. Because for a Jewish son to say to their Jewish dad, give me my share of the estate, was the equivalent of saying to his dad, Dad, I wish you were dead. And not just in a kind of day and age today where kind of fathers, sometimes the relationship is strained between father and son. This was in a deeply religious tradition, full of community and family, where fathers were revered, patriarchs ran the families. To say to your dad, I wish you were dead, was outrageous. It would have been the end of that relationship, regardless of what happens next. It was an outrageous, scandalous thing to say. And yet the son goes to the father and says, Father, give me my share of the estate. What happens next to the Jewish audience of the time is almost as shocking. So he divided his property between them. This just wouldn't happen. People who know Jewish culture would have looked at this and gone, no way would that have happened. It gets worse. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. I mean, to some extent, the audience aren't surprised at this point, but this was just outrageous, and possibly even would have left the father in deep financial trouble, because he would have divided his property, but his property may have been held up in all kinds of ways. So the father and the family left behind would have possibly been in real trouble. And the younger son squanders his wealth in wild living. It gets worse. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. And again, if you know anything about Jewish culture, you will know that the first half of the Hebrew scriptures were full of the religious laws, and pigs were not only physically filthy animals, they were also spiritually unclean. For Jesus it's very difficult for Jesus to paint a bleaker and darker picture of how far the younger son had fallen. Modern day equivalents would be kind of, imagine the worst criminal on the worst wing of the worst prison in England, and you've probably got a picture of quite what Jesus is communicating with how far this son has fallen. He says he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, there's a turning point in every story, isn't there? When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am, starving to death? I'll go to my father and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. He begins to write this speech. Make me one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. Don't miss this next bit. No matter how long you've been following Jesus, what happens next is just beautiful. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The audience aren't expecting that. And the son in the story is not expecting that. At best, he thinks he can go back and be a servant. As he makes his journey back, The reality is, if you're following Jesus today, there has been a moment when you've come to your senses and come home. Do you know what? You might be here by accident and you might not be following Jesus, or you might, for whatever reason, be far from the Father today. Know this with all your heart. The Father's eyes have not left the road down which you've gone. Or maybe you're here this morning and you know people, friends, neighbours, family members, who feel far from the Father today, who on their journey are way back. The Father's eyes have not left the road. There's always a way home. And then what happens next is the third outrageously shocking moment. It says that he ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. And again, to a first century Jewish audience, this was utterly scandalous. The idea that a father would run was ridiculously undignified. He would have had to hitch up his robe. Middle-aged men of that time did not run. It would have been the most undignified, embarrassing moment. But part of the reason he was running is that there was a ceremony within the village, right? So the kind of this when the younger son would have gone and left the community and left the family, especially having done such a scandalous thing, to say to his father, "I wish you were dead," and taken the estate. There was this ceremony that would have been undertaken by one of the leaders of the community in the village, where they'd have taken a pot to the edge of the village, the road down which the son had gone, and they would have smashed the pot on the road as a way of saying, this community member, this son, is dead to us and has gone. And so then what would happen is if that son ever then came back, if the village got to them first, terrible things might have happened. Might certainly not be allowed back into the village, but maybe even beaten up or maybe even killed. So one of the reasons the father runs is to get to his son first. Isn't that beautiful? And the father runs in this undignified way. God runs as we journey towards him. And the son begins his speech. You can imagine, can't you? It's a really moving moment where the kind of the interaction between the wayward son and the surprised reaction from the son, who can't believe his dad's run to him, who knows presumably the ceremony that would have been enacted, the fear on his face as he approaches the village. But yet, as he gets there, he begins his speech. "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But then you compare that to the speech that he wrote in verse 18 and 19. He doesn't get to finish it. Possibly because he's smothered by the arms of his father. Isn't that beautiful? And the father says, "Quick, quick, quick. Bring the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet." Do you know why he does that? Because he's restoring his identity. Slaves didn't wear shoes in the house. Sons did. The ring was the signal that the family authority within the community. He restores his identity. "Bring a fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." As I say, I've got two sons. I'd like to show you a video of not my favourite son. I don't have a favourite son. I'd like to show you a video of my first son. This is my favourite video of Caleb when he was little. We're really hoping he's going to be a footballer. And when Caleb was a bit younger, one morning he comes downstairs really hungry, and he says he walks into the kitchen. He's like his dad. "I'm always hungry." Walks into the kitchen. He says, "Mummy, I want a snack." And it's about 11:30 in the morning. My wife is a very calm, measured kind of character, and says to Caleb, "No, Caleb, no snack." Caleb says, "No, Mummy, I said I want a snack." At this point, my wife should have realised not to negotiate with toddlers or terrorists, but she takes her life out of her hands and says, "Caleb, it's 11:30, lunch is until 12:15, no snack." Caleb, at this point, spies one of my espresso mugs on the side of the kitchen. When it comes to coffee, I've got all the gear and no idea. It's the classic kind of birthday, Christmas present combo. And he spies one of my nice new espresso mugs on the side, and he picks it up. He kind of weighs it in his hand. He looks at his mum, and he says, "Mummy, I said I want a snack." Danny keeps her cool and says, "Caleb, no snack, and I hope you're not about to do what I think you're about to do." Caleb looks at his mum, looks at the cup, throws the cup on the floor, and says, "Mummy, I said I want a snack." Well, of course, at this point, World War III breaks out in our house, and he is sent to the naughty spot, which I've been reflecting on. The naughty spot is a good punishment if you're over the age of 18, right? So for me, the deal was at that time in our house, you would sit on the naughty spot for a minute for however old you were. So Caleb at that point has to sit on the naughty spot for like 4 minutes because he's 4 years old. For me, if you gave me 39 minutes sat on my own, that's not punishment, that's a spiritual retreat. But for Caleb, it's a punishment. He sits down on the, and I come downstairs, and as I come downstairs, there's like crockery on the floor of the kitchen. Danny's like going, she's getting back to the food, which is probably burning at this point. Caleb's like crying, and the tears are coming down his cheeks, and his face is red, and he's going, "Sorry, Daddy, I'm sorry." And then he says something really interesting. He says, "I want to go home." And I'm like, "You are at home." But then what happens is in his kind of sorrow, I take his face and I turn it towards mine. And I say, "Caleb, I love you. And I forgive you. It's going to be okay." There's a truth at the heart of the Christian story, demonstrated by this parable. That when we turn to Jesus, no matter where we're at on the journey, Jesus looks us each in the eye and says, "I love you. I forgive you. It's going to be okay." There is always a way back. And I think for those of us who've been following Jesus for a while, we need to always remember that. There is always a way back. The Father's eyes have never left the road. If you've been following Jesus for 10 minutes or 10 years or decades, there is always a way back for others, and there is always a way back for you, no matter how far you feel or fall. But the story's not over. Because actually, it's a beautiful, as an evangelist, I love this story. But the story is written for the elder son. Because it's in response to the Pharisees. Look at the beginning of chapter 15. The tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and teachers of the law were muttering, "This man welcomes sinners and eat with them." So Jesus tells these stories of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son in response to the Pharisees, who are the religious people. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field. When he came to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and the father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The elder brother became angry and refused to go in. It's really easy, isn't it, to see how the elder brother would be angry. Because actually this son has really blown it. And actually has landed the family in poverty. Half the estate's gone. It's gone. So you can see how the older son's angry. So the father goes out and pleads with him. And he answers his father, "Look," listen to his words. "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders." Now, from what we know of the father so far, does he sound like a master of a slave who is his son? "Yet you never gave me one young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours," not his brother, "when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." In this story, the elder son is as lost as the younger son. The elder son is in the house, but he's not at home. And how often for us as Christians who've been following Jesus for a while can we be in the house but not at home? Do you know, I don't know about any of you, I've got quite a boring conversion story. I grew up in a Christian family. I was dragged to church ever since I was a fetus. I got no choice. It was really unfair. But I made a decision to follow Jesus when I was 6 years old. Someone told me that I needed my sins forgiven, that I could know forgiveness for my past, God's presence in my present, and hope for the future. I could go to heaven when I die. I could be friends with God. I thought I was 6 years old. I was even more excitable then than I am now. I thought this was the best news ever. As a teenager, followed Jesus. I was actually, my teenage years were much more kind of projects, hugs, and sausage rolls than sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was pretty boring, actually. I didn't have a younger son experience of taking loads of drugs, kicking puppies, going to prison, all that stuff. You hear those stories of people at events who come up with these crazy testimonies. And then you're like, wow. But for me, I'm much more likely to be like the older son. And some of us as Christians can get into a mindset where we think our relationship with the Father can become slaving rather than sonship. Obedience can feel like following orders. And so when we think of where we are this morning, with these two sons, with these two journeys, where are we? I mean, some of us may feel like we're in the pigsty. For us, the good news is there is always a way back. We can come to our senses at any moment. And the Father's eyes haven't left the road. But for some of us maybe we feel like we're wandering away and we need to turn around and come back. But maybe for some of us, we're like the elder son who've been in the house for a very long time. And the Father's called us to remember this. You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. You see, we all know what it's like to be lost. There's the frustrated kind of lost, where there's no one to ask for aid, where time begins to fade and you wish you'd stayed at home. There's the hopeless kind of lost, where the money has been spurned, where there's nowhere else to turn and your heart yearns, your soul burns for home. And there's no place like home. Home, the place our hearts are based, where our stories are embraced, where our bodies are embraced, our memories interlaced with the smells, the tastes of home. Where the warmth hits our face, entering familiar space, and our pulse drops its pace, and we breathe, because there's no place like home. And yet we've never been, it seems, in our ontological time machine, so far from the scene of our dwelling. We're wayward, willful, whimsical, and wanton. We're so far from Eden, we're like an orangutan in Sweden. In our culture, we're like vultures, consuming media like it's roadkill, forming sculptures with home pages that will kill us till we realize there's no place like home. And yet there's hope for home. Because the desire isn't lacking like the prodigal who's packing and the homing beacon tracking us home. And the journey back's begun. The central heating's on. Your room is being prepared. The relationship's been repaired. And grace is being spoken. The door begins to open. The promise is unbroken. Because the cry of the apostles, the deep, incessant God call, the call of the gospel is come home. And there's no place like home. And so this morning, as we start off our weekend, I want to encourage us to do two things. First of all, I wonder, in a moment we're going to have a time of quiet where we ask God to ask us, where are we? Where are we this morning? The psalmist says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way and lead me in the way everlasting. So in a moment, I'm going to encourage us to spend a couple of minutes before God saying, where are we? And my second encouragement to us is not to miss it. Don't miss it. I read recently the autobiography of a guy called Duncan Bannatyne. You might have heard of him. He runs a few gyms in this country. He's also one of the dragons in Dragon's Den. And he in his autobiography talks about an encounter he has with Jesus. When I read this, I was really surprised. It was a business book. It wasn't a Christian book, and I didn't know that Duncan was a Christian. And I read this that he writes. He says this in one of the chapters of his book. He says, it was there and then that God said hello. I'm reading this, I'm like, wow. He says, I felt I'd been completely consumed by this presence, that something had completely shrouded and taken hold of me. It was unmistakable. I knew who had come, and I also knew why. It wasn't a spiritual thing, it was a Christian thing. It was profound, and I stood there stunned, considering the offer and thinking about what it would mean. I'm reading this, I'm like, wow, Duncan Bannatyne. His encounter with Jesus, how did I not know that? He was a Christian. Wow, what? Then I read on and genuinely began to weep as I read on, because it says this. Duncan says, I said, no, I'm not ready. And God said, okay, and disappeared. And my overwhelming feeling as I read that was just devastating sadness. Because he has this encounter like few people have. I mean, I've been following Jesus for over 30 years. I'm not sure I've had an encounter quite like that. God appears to him and says hello, and he basically says, will you follow me? Duncan says no. And God says, okay, and disappears. He misses it. My invitation to you this weekend is don't miss it. Don't miss it. The Bible's full of people who miss it. Pilate, as he's trying Jesus, asks the question, what is truth? He's staring into the faiths of the way, the truth, and the life. Followers of Jesus on the way to Emmaus say to the person they're walking with, have you not heard of what's happened? They miss it. The Magi, following the star, and they get distracted and they go to the palace rather than the crib, because they think that's where the king will be born. They miss it. Don't miss it this weekend. Just invite us to pray. And just in your heart, my first invitation is for you to say to God, God, I don't want to miss it this weekend. I don't want to miss the steps forward on the journey that you're inviting me to take. And I feel as we decide that as a community this morning, I just sense that for some of us we are distracted by things. Some as trivial as the football even. Some things more important than that possibly as well, but God wants us to really focus on him today. Don't miss it. Some of us today need to actually decide now we're not going to kind of check our phone, or we're going to mentally choose to not focus on the discouragements, the distractions, the worries that we have, that we might focus entirely on what God wants to do in our lives today. Just decide to do that in your heart now. And ask the Spirit of God, where am I? Where am I today? It's your direction, your location that determines your destiny. Choose to set your heart like the sun in the pigsty towards the living God. Finally, as we set out on this journey today, I do think as I was reflecting and choosing that passage for today, that some of us do identify more with the older brother. And for some of us, our relationship with God has felt like slavery. And the Father's attitude to us is the same as the Father's attitude to the younger son. He runs, wants to restore our identity and welcome us home, even though we've been in the house. So, Father, at the start of this journey, as we proverbially put our coat on, put our shoes on, got everything, phone, wallet, keys, open the door and step out at the outset of this weekend, Lord, we don't want to miss it. We open our hearts and our hands and our minds to you. And we pray, Holy Spirit, would you speak to us, move us forward. And when we get to lunchtime tomorrow, would we have completed, fulfilled the plans that you have for us in this time?